So my name is Paul O'Hanlon, and probably what I should start off by saying that my mission is to sort of explain how the Disability Voting Coalition was created, and that there are probably a cast of hundreds, if not thousands, who were involved in this, and the only thing I could probably say that's true is that nobody had a bigger role than Rachel and I. And so to tell the story of the Disability Voting Coalition, I have to tell the story of Rachel and I working together, and so that's kind of what you're going to hear. This is a picture of Rachel delivering a petition signed by hundreds of people who were residents of personal care homes in Harrisburg. And when Rachel and I met, we were both relatively new at our jobs. Rachel worked for the Mental Health Association of Allegheny County. I worked for what was then called the Disabilities Law Project. I have been a housing lawyer for about 20 years, specializing in low-income housing issues. And when I started working for Disabilities Law Project, I was presented with an opportunity to go into the area of voting law. We had just gotten a grant through the Help America Vote Act, and the mission of that grant was to ensure the full participation of people with disabilities in the electoral process. So the question was, did I want to do that instead of housing? And I thought, the full participation of people with disabilities in the electoral process, that sounds kind of exciting. So I said, okay, sure. Rachel was doing organizing in the mental health area, and we met at a housing conference, and we started talking about how we could work together, me with my interest in election law, and Rachel and her interest in organizing people with mental health conditions. And as Paul explained, really this is a conversation of really about 10 years of work. And this is a picture of Rachel at the beach where she had written into the sand, "Love Life." And it really was both sort of what Rachel represented and really, I think, her message to all of us. One of the things about Rachel is that Rachel self-identified as being a person with a mental health history, and it didn't always come out, but one of the ways it would come out is that Rachel didn't like to leave things to the last minute. And so she would always say to me, I don't want to leave things to the last minute. So we would be planning, for example, a legislative breakfast that we were planning maybe 2.5 months in the future. And I would then, leave that, we would plan this thing, and then 2 days later I would see her, and she would say, okay, I have the room, I have the guests confirmed, I have, and I have all the food arranged, and the thing about Rachel is that it was sort of, she had superhuman abilities to organize things and make things happen. And so it was just one of the amazing things working with her. This is a quote from something that Rachel wrote. Voting does more than elect politicians. Through the act of voting, people become dynamic players in the political arena where policy decisions are made, and both their political and personal power grows. They become active citizens connected with the community of voters. And the thing that you need to understand also about Rachel's approach to kind of political organizing is that it really fit within the mental health recovery movement. And so much of what Rachel was about was organizing people with disabilities to really make progress in their recovery And recovery for people with disabilities can include sort of recovering their place in life. And so I think that, one of the things that you're going to see in this is really her ongoing efforts to really empower people and enable them to recover their lives. Meanwhile, what I bring to the table is sort of a different attitude. One of my heroes in the area of election law is Willie Sutton. Willie Sutton, you may not realize, had nothing to do with elections or voting. He was a bank robber. And Willie Sutton's magic was to basically say, I rob banks because that's where the money is. So, my approach was, if I'm here to include the full participation of people with disabilities in the electoral process, there's something you need to know. People with disabilities are the largest minority group in America. You don't disenfranchise, you don't marginalize the largest minority group in American politics without excluding huge numbers of people along the way. So I wanted to know, where were the people with disabilities that were being excluded? And Rachel introduced me to the world of personal care homes. Now, I don't know how many people here know what a personal care home is. It's not a nursing home. It's a lot like a nursing home, but it's different. And so here's what you need to know about personal care homes. There are about 51,000 people in Pennsylvania that lived in personal care homes at this point in time, and about now it's about the same. Allegheny County had the largest number of personal care homes and had the largest number of people living in personal care homes in all of Pennsylvania. And statewide, about almost 10,000 of those people had SSI as their source of income. And one of the things about a personal care home is that it's essentially, if you need skilled nursing, you're probably going to be in a nursing home. If you don't need skilled nursing, but you need help with activities of daily living, like feeding or dressing or preparing food or remembering to take your medication, there's a variety of things that cause people to land in a personal care home. And lots of people with mental illness land in personal care homes as a point after hospitalization. So, for example, they may be hospitalized, and the next step is to have them go into personal care home. And you can get stuck there, we discovered. And so what Rachel was explaining to me was that as an organizer in the mental health area, what she was concerned was that people got stuck in a personal care home. And the way that it happened is that when you live in a personal care home, if, for example, your income is SSI, all of your money every month goes to the personal care home except for a whopping $60 a month. And that $60 a month is what you use to buy your clothing, your toiletries, your medical copay, transportation. It doesn't go far. Now, after you splurge with your $60 a month, how long will it take you to save up the first month's rent and security deposit when you're ready to move? And the answer is probably forever. And so what we started to look at, how could we support people with disabilities to be able to transition out of personal care homes? And so that became our first kind of focus, because we knew that in order to build a political movement, you have to both focus on the mechanics of organizing and registering people to vote, but you also had to give them a reason to vote, something to get interested and excited about. And so we looked at how do we build campaigns around issues that people with disabilities would be interested and excited about. And so essentially what we started urging the state to do was people who have SSI as their source of income, living in a personal care home, get an extra state supplement. And that was hundreds of dollars a month that the state paid for them to be able to stay in a personal care home. And essentially our argument was, okay, then if that supplement could be made portable, if a person could move out of that personal care home, taking that state supplement, using it for either a rent supplement or to pay for supports to come into the home, that it would enable people to transition out of personal care homes. And so that really became our first campaign. Meanwhile, as we were the idea was we would develop these campaigns and we would use the Letter of Voices Be Heard group that we were organizing and building to be our kind of organizing group. And Letter of Voices Be Heard was sort of designed to be a cross-disability group, including both people with all disabilities. One of our members then presented us with an opportunity around Election Day because she was assigned to an inaccessible polling place, and at that point there was really no recourse for her because her deadline to have requested either an absentee ballot or what's known as an alternative ballot was a week before Election Day. So by the time Election Day ran around, she had no recourse, and we organized a demonstration and was surprised when the poll workers brought out a ballot for her to vote and basically allowed her to vote on the sidewalk. Now, Pennsylvania does not allow curbside voting, and one of the things we were urging was that Pennsylvania should allow curbside voting, certainly at polling places that were inaccessible. And so that was kind of what we were hoping to force. And we got that result, although as the election director says in this article, it was a mistake that they shouldn't have given her that option of voting with a ballot at the curbside because state law doesn't allow it. As a result of this action, we actually got the state to implement a new procedure, and they created what's now known as an emergency alternative ballot that you can request as late as Election Day. But the problem was, we were glad that they came up with some solution, but what you'll notice is that the solution that they created was if you go to vote on Election Day and can't get into your polling place because it's not accessible, what you need to do now is get yourself down to the county election office and apply for an emergency absentee ballot, alternative ballot, which means that they've translated an accessibility problem to a transportation problem. And that for people who live in rural counties where there isn't any public transportation to speak of, certainly not one that you can get on that same day, it made essentially it was no help. And so when that was the state policy that was created, we realized that we really need to start operating at the state level, that really just being limited to Allegheny County wasn't going to really give us the power to confront these state decisions, that we needed a larger kind of approach. And so that was when we decided to start organizing for what became the Disability Voting Coalition. And in 2005, November, was our kind of kickoff meeting in Harrisburg. And we did get press for that event, which was great. The Patriot News wrote an article. I was quoted as saying, too many service providers confuse being nonpartisan with being non-political. And that was really a reflection of a growing frustration that we were feeling around the whole issue of voter registration and disability agencies. So, meanwhile, we had a bit of a victory on our campaign about the making the personal, the SSI supplement portable. The state agreed to pilot that idea of ours, but unfortunately it was sort of, the way that the pilot was done sort of guaranteed its non-success. What we realized was that if we could make a supplement portable and enable people to move out of a personal care home, it was really the people who were most able, most at the point where they could move out, you know, sort of like, you know, it was sometimes known as creaming, you know, getting the people at the very top and enabling them to move out. But the problem was, that's not what the state did. The state basically said, we're going to make it available to homes that are under closure orders, where the residents would have to make a decision within 30 days and do it all on their own. And we said, you know, there's never going to be anybody in a crisis situation that's going to elect to do that. And we were right. It was a pilot that essentially failed. So out of that, we sort of recouped, because there were a number of things that we found frustrating with that campaign. And one of which was, of course, the way that the pilot was run. But the other one was that it was a campaign that lacked a good constituency. That, you know, most of the, if 10% of the, you know, personal care home residents might conceivably be ready to move out, that meant that 90% weren't. And a lot of people felt that it was a campaign that didn't really matter to them. They weren't looking to move out. And, you know, and so I think it was a good campaign from a policy standpoint, but it wasn't a good campaign from an organizing standpoint. And the other thing was that, you know, it didn't allow people to tell a story that had them feeling good about themselves. And so seeing that, we sort of realized that we needed to change our approach. And so what we did instead was that we listened to what the people were talking about when we were talking about this idea we had of a pilot that, you know, of making the supplement portable. What they talked about was, you know, we only have $60 a month. It'd be great if we could get that increased. And so we started to focus on that, this thing that was known as a personal needs allowance, this $60, hadn't been increased for over 15 years. And so we started a campaign to increase that. And this was a picture of a Harrisburg action that was really around bringing attention to that. So this is just some of the kind of literature that we were putting out. This is David C. David served our country in the U.S. Marine Corps during the Vietnam War, and as a police officer for 7 years, a series of serious health problems landed David, who was 56, in a personal care home. Each month after paying his room and board, David receives $60 to spend, and it's sort of like the budget of what he spends on $10 clothing, a shop at St. Vincent de Paul, et cetera, et cetera. David's message was, Governor Rendell, if I get a raise in my monthly allowance, I'd live a more productive life. I could go back to school, I could go to outings with the drop-in center, I'd be able to socialize more. Shirley's message, there's no way you can live on $60. My husband's birthday is 6 months from now. I want to give him a gift, and I'll have to struggle to save for his birthday present. Bob's message, the price of everything is increasing. 60 is not enough to live on. I served this country in Vietnam and I voted for you, Governor Rendell, at least scratch my back a little. And I think that what we saw was that this was a campaign that people could just be regular people wanting to do the things that everybody wanted to do, and it was really a much more successful campaign. January 2nd of 2009, we were successful. I think that we got what amounts to about a 40% increase, which sounds really great, but it was only about $25, but it still mattered, and it was a successful campaign. Meanwhile, as we were having these sort of issues campaigns, we were working on the doing of organizing, of getting people registered to vote, doing vote registration trainings, and we were really frustrated at the beginning, around 2003, 2004. Of course, it was a presidential year, 2004. As we all know, every 4 years we get kind of hyper crazy about politics and elections, and so 2003, 2004, we were looking at the upcoming presidential election, and so we decided to do a series of trainings directed toward disability agencies and developed this guide for agencies that serve people with disabilities. And we were frustrated because the truth is they didn't come. And what we were seeing was that the law, the National Voter Registration Act, says each state shall designate as voter registration agencies all offices in the state that provide state-funded programs primarily engaged in providing services to persons with disabilities. So, and that means that if the state's funding a program, whether it's homemaker services, Meals on Wheels, personal care homes, nursing homes, these are all agencies that are supposed to be registering people to vote. And so when the agencies weren't coming to us, weren't attending our trainings, we decided to go to them. And what Rachel essentially organized was people who were part of this Let Our Voices Be Heard and the Disability Voting Coalition to start going out to agencies and staffing tables and doing registrations. But as we were doing that, we were sort of noticing that, again, it was more like things weren't happening, and we didn't have any data to really prove our experience that things weren't happening, but it seemed that things weren't happening. The other thing, around 2008, we piloted a program that has continued to this day called Ballots for Patients, and the idea was that on election day, hospitals are full of people who weren't planning to be there probably, and that they don't have a way to vote unless we bring the election to them, and so we started doing ballots for patients, then around 2007 we discovered that the state actually kept records on this thing called voter registration by disability agency, and we were surprised that they kept records because we didn't know how they would even know. I mean, so you may be surprised that this is a report that gets issued every year to the General Assembly explaining what kind of voter registrations were going on. And because, and that's when we started this campaign called Recount. Recount was about organizing individuals with disabilities to register to vote, and a recount puts the state on notice that we're tracking these numbers. When we realized that the state was actually keeping records, we started to bring attention to what those records show, and recounts a statement to the political parties that people with disabilities make up a sizable portion of eligible voters. This was sort of our reach. Rachel was an amazing organizer, but everybody has their limits. So we had really a reach to about a 6-county area, and so here's some data. Our 6 counties have about 16, almost 17% of the state population. And what we were surprised to see was that what the state data showed was that our disability registrations were only about half of that, about 8.1% of the state. And so, this is 2006 numbers, which we find out the next year. So in other words, we didn't know what 2006 numbers were till after July of 2007. So this was June, after July 2007, and we saw that the numbers were really pretty bad. And we thought, okay, we can make those numbers go up. So this would be 2007, and this was before we really started. So basically these two years, 2006, 2007, was before we got involved. 2008 is a presidential election year. We were very active, and we were hoping that our results would show up on the state records. So here's what it was. So the following year, we basically accounted for over half of the state's registrations. And 2009, we also accounted for over half. Basically in 2008, so 2007, Allegheny County had 0 registrations by disability agencies. By 2008, we led the state, and we've led the state every year since then. So here's 2010. 2011 is the point where Rachel was getting sick, and we were really curtailing some of the organizing that she was doing as a result. But 2011 numbers, in other words, this is 2012 now, where we're looking at 2011 numbers. 2012 was really a decision both because of Rachel's declining health and kind of a growing frustration on our part that, the reality is Pennsylvania is a state of 12 million people. If 2 of us can have an impact where we account for over 50% of the state's registration, there's a serious problem there. The 2 greatest people in the universe should not be able to account for 50% of the whole state's registration. And so what the numbers, although our numbers were high, it really showed that there wasn't anything else happening beyond kind of like what we were doing. And it raised the question of whether, kind of what direction to go. A lot of the allies that we were working with decided that they wanted to sue the state because they weren't seeing numbers that really accounted for it. So I wanted to just sort of show you, so our kind of peers were the county assistance offices. And we were looking at, okay, how do our registration compare with their registrations? And you see that, it's sort of like we were about 1/4 to 1/5 of their numbers. And all the numbers are pretty crappy, but basically, like just as an example, in 2010, the county assistance office did about 3,000 registrations, and we did 431. Back in 2008, when we had over 50% of registration, the state disability agency registration were only 733, so it's not like we're dealing with giant numbers. So there was a lawsuit that was brought BPEP and some local groups in Allegheny County were the plaintiffs, and unfortunately the disability community, despite my best efforts, did not join in that lawsuit, did not bring the disability agency's issue into that lawsuit. So the question is, well, did that lawsuit make a difference? What you're going to see is that basically, beginning in 2011, where before the lawsuit, there were 5,000 registrations by county assistance offices. The next year, there were 10,000. The year after that, there were 47,000. The year after that, there were 66,000. So it was obvious that the lawsuit made a difference, but since we weren't part of it, we were left behind. The last thing that we really turned to was civic engagement trainings to work, really allow for kind of remote participation. We're looking at how Rachel could be involved in video conferencing and things like that. And I think that what's really kind of dramatic was to sort of see the evolution of our expectation of our members. You know, in the very beginning, we trained people to have the role of what we call voter educators. And they were people who knew how to kind of answer questions and help people register. Soon what we discovered was that people were ready for more than that. And we started this program called ambassadors. And ambassadors would be people who would go to an agency, set up, plan to staff a table, organize that table, et cetera, and then finally, in our last kind of things, we were developing what we were calling citizen leaders. And so I want to end with kind of two things. One is a quote from one of our members, Let Our Voices Be Heard. His name was Ralph. And I think that it really represents everything that kind of Rachel was shooting for. Ralph says, I feel that I'm here. I should say that this was after a trip to Harrisburg. What Rachel would do is every time there would be a trip to Harrisburg, the ride back, she would sort of be going to everybody in the bus, writing in her little notebook that she always carried everything that people would say to her about being on that trip. And so this is what Ralph said. I feel that I'm here representing a lot of people. I can go back home and share the information with others who aren't as involved as I am. Being involved in this group, being respected by others, has helped me to have respect for myself. If you have a sense of self-respect, you can go anywhere with it. I feel like I want to belong and to bring the message back. When they applauded for us on the Senate floor, I was deeply moved. People of worth could see us. They were applauded because of being recognized for being part of the success of getting the personal needs allowance increase. And this was a quote that Rachel liked to use a lot, that meant a lot to her. People who have ideas and drive are on every street in every walk of life, waiting in the wings, ready to be discovered. Someone has to reach them and recognize them. Someone has to ask them to step out, not to be consumers or props or spectators, but to be players in the unfolding drama of public life. So if anybody here was part of Let Our Voices Be Heard or worked with Rachel, if you could sort of stand or something, I just want to kind of honor people who were involved and so thank you.